I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. In a world where truth often feels negotiable and leadership is frequently judged more by tribe than by principle, conversations about ethics can be polarizing. In this candid episode of the Leadovation podcast, I sat down with Philippe Johnson, a retired Air Force officer, public servant, and author whose new book uses the presidency of Donald Trump as a case study in what not to do as a leader. That lens sparked a very deep conversation about how we define ethical leadership, what counts as fact, and how personal bias plays a role in both perception and decision-making. We also examined how in a post-world, that is post-COVID, I should say, dominated by virtual meetings and less face-to-face interaction, our ability to build trust and find common ground is quietly eroding, making ethical leadership not just important, but also, quite frankly, essential. During his 24 years of active duty, Lieutenant Colonel Johnson served as a fixed and rotary-wing pilot, intelligence officer, and diplomat, military attaché that is, and was honored with the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters and the Air Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster. While I don't understand what all that means, but I know many of you out there do and get just what an accomplishment that is. He also served as the staff of 2 Air Force major commands as his 2 final assignments. Philip received a bachelor degree in political science from the University of Florida and earned his master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland's School of Public Policy. He's got a book called What Hangs in the Balance: The Case for Principled, Ethical, Competent, and Courageously Selfless Leadership. Philippe Johnson on the Leadovation podcast. Philip, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Leadovation podcast, hailing from probably a hot and sticky west coast of Florida in beginning of summer. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Dean. It's great to be with you.
I know that you've got a background in the military, public service, and you are an expert and thought a lot about leadership and lessons learned that you had when you were in the military. And the topic around ethical leadership, I think, is an interesting one. I guess let's just start with that. Is there, in your calling it ethical leadership, is there something as opposite of that, which we might call unethical? And how do we define ethical leadership? What is that?
Sure. Yeah. The opposite of ethical leadership would be abuse of authority, use of undue influence, perhaps putting self first in decision making instead of duty and principle. But sure, it's about making decisions that are for the best of your organization, for the organization's mission, for the people that your organization are serving. And of course, in compliance with the law, the Constitution, for public servants. So in a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously it's a kind of a softball question. I think most people would agree with that. But what I find in companies is that we have competencies about what leadership means. We might even have value statements and mission statements and all the other things that go with it. But I believe in this idea that we judge ourselves based on our intentions and we judge others based on their actions. And so if we've got this 2 different measurement systems about what leadership is or what ethics are, depending upon how you want to, put into that space, then I might be doing something that I think is ethical. and you might be interpreting it as being unethical based on the fact that you're judging my actions, not my intentions. How do we get people, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to here, Philip, as we lead into this, is how do we get everybody on the same page by what we mean by good ethical leadership? Obviously, if you've got the Constitution of the United States, you've got these documents, you've got code of conduct with the military, you have that sort of defined for you. But how do we get a group of people with all sorts of different ideas on the same page around what we mean by ethical leadership?
Well, I think it starts with clearly defining the core principles and values of the organization. And people need to understand those and how those guide their conduct, their decisions. And of course, leadership has to be the one to model those without question. So, yeah, it would seem strange to me that if that you're judging somebody else differently, when you should be operating off the same principles, the same rules, and maybe it's the case of those not being clear. I realize in the business world it might be a little bit fuzzier, but yeah, it seems to me like it all comes down to the organizational principles and values, and ensuring people understand those. You don't necessarily come into an organization with a relationship to those organizational values and principles, because we all come in, even into the military or to government organizations, with different backgrounds, different ethical ideas, if you will. But at some point within an organization, whether it's private sector or public sector, people need to be aware of what's expected with them and comply. And so it shouldn't be too different from one person to the next.
Why then don't we comply, even if it is clear?
Self-interest is one reason. Personality orders that lead to self-interest, whether it's narcissism or antisocial behavior disorders, those kinds of things. But and then there are other reasons why people don't do things, because they lack discipline and self-control. They're lazy. I mean, if you look at, for example, the world of aviation mishaps, because I spent 3 years working aviation safety in the Air Force. One of the major causes of aviation mishaps is non-compliance resulting from a lack of personal discipline or self-control. Mm-hmm. So that's one factor, I think, as to why people don't do what they're supposed to do.
So I think that you bring up a great distinction between a military set of guidelines, expectations, principles, competencies, as you would. And then if you could say, okay, now on the other side of the ledger, we've got private businesses that are not on a military model. Are you advocating that the private sector, the businesses that are not in the military, need to adapt more of a military perspective, meaning this is sort of the way it is, a little bit more hierarchical? We don't necessarily need you to be engaged. We just need you to follow.
No, not necessarily. You don't want to stifle creativity and other ways of contributing to an organization. But yeah, if you're talking about a problem where you have non-compliance with organizational rules, regulations, and again, people who are clearly violating the core principles and values of the organization, then yeah, you may need more accountability than you may find in the average private organization.
But there is something interesting about the current trend. Maybe it's changing a bit, but when we talk about the military perspective of compliance, following rules, following expectations, following competencies, it is a very clear set. There's a reward, there's a punishment sort of setup that we adhere to. We don't question it, right? And then when you get into the business sector, we're trying to bring people to that compliance through a different process. We want them to be engaged. We want them to add their own ideas. We want to ask them to participate in the creation of those things. Do you feel that process works? Or is there anything in particular that we should be taking from the military and adapting it into private sector businesses?
Well, one thing I think that could be adapted, which I think is beginning to happen more in government organizations, is the idea that ethical training is not necessarily distinct from leadership training. It needs to be a core part of leadership training that happens, from the outset of somebody's career, and then that training grows. It becomes more sophisticated as somebody becomes more senior. Because if you're lacking that ethical foundation from the very beginning, especially people who are going to move into managerial or leadership roles, um, then you're going to end up with senior leaders who unfortunately are not setting the example and doing potentially tremendous damage to their organizations. But I know that wasn't the exact question you asked. So
No, but
if you
you're getting
kind of
there.
go
I
back,
guess
yeah.
how do you then, excuse me, teach ethics?
Well, first of all, it has to be modeled by leadership.
Okay, let's
What?
assume that. Let's go back even further. Let's go
Yeah,
further upstream, right? And then once we figured out what that is and we've developed what those ethical competencies are, then leadership is going to go model it. Okay, I get that.
yeah.
But how do you then, if you go upstream, lag indicator, lead indicator kind of stuff, right? How do we then teach? And then who defines what ethics are within an organization? Or are you proposing that there's some standard ones that are ubiquitous no matter where we are on the planet?
Well, I think for businesses, it's to some extent it's up to them. Although obviously they have to follow certain rules that are set out for them by the government in the case of how businesses run themselves. You look at some of the scandals you've had with banks. Obviously, there are clear
Sure.
violations of taking advantage of customers. And I don't think it was a case of people not knowing what they were doing. Some of the people who were, you know, performing, if you want to call them more, some of the less managerial tasks may not have been aware as much of what the intent of what they were doing was. But cheating is cheating. Um,
Certainly.
so yeah. So as far as you're asking how do we teach people to be ethical before they even come into an organization? I guess.
Well, it's sort of like it's a really interesting path we're going down here, Philip, because I mean, who sets the ethics? Like, for example, let me just kind of back up here. I've worked with a lot of different organizations and teams over the years, and leaders in particular, senior like CEOs and so forth. And there's a certain kind of calm and clarity that I get when I work with a CEO who has a fairly strong spiritual or religious ethical foundation. Like I can
Mm-hmm.
think of five of them right off the top of my head. Now, they don't proselytize, they're not trying to convert, but you just know that there's something that is guiding them in how they make decisions and how they see the world, right? And you talk about that and you lead and you uncover, you go, oh, you have a strong Catholic, Mormon, you name it, Jewish background. You can sense that this is sort of seeping into the way in which they lead, right? And the way in which they set up their competence for their leaders. And by and large, I think that it's very refreshing to be around that, right? It's like, so then if you don't have that with a leader, then how do we then teach ethics? Is ethics, are we in a sense, as organizations, taking on the role that our parents should have, that our places of worship should have had we been involved? Are we getting it too late to be teaching ethics when people are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s?
No, I don't think it's ever too late. And as you said, as I was saying earlier, because people come into organizations, whether it's private or public, with different backgrounds, different ideas about what's ethical, different influences, you at some point that has to gel if you want people to work in a framework that you expect them to work in that organization. You asked about where ethical considerations come from. Obviously, there are clear rules in government, and I suspect in private organizations there are as well. Maybe not as much in some companies, but so what I was thinking about a second ago is what kind of ethical violations you're maybe pointing to that happen in the private sector that would make me think about this in a different way, perhaps.
Well, it's really broad and general because I think what I'm hearing you say is that there is a a relationship between ethics and leadership, or the relationship between ethics and competencies. Essentially, it's our definition of what leaders are. Organizations, we say, what is a leader? Well, here are the competencies. These are the behaviors that we want to emulate. And if they do, we believe that we're going to have better results, better engagement, fill in the blank. So I don't really have anything specific. What I do feel like what I'm kind of dancing around is like, who decides what ethics are? I mean, it's literally beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Is ethics in the eye of the beholder as well? My version of ethics and your version of ethics, we might agree on many things, but we may not agree on the same thing. Or we might see an expression of somebody's leadership and say, well, that was unethical. And I might say, well, I think that's not, I actually think it was ethical. So it goes back to that comment I made before, that we judge people's behavior or their actions, not their intentions, right? So it kind of goes back to the chicken or the egg. How do we then clarify who decides what's ethical?
Well, in the most simplistic terms, I guess it starts with, is your business doing what's legal?
Okay,
every different kind of business has some kind of regulations that it has to follow, whether it's financial or the airlines, whatever. But to some extent, yeah, some businesses are going to define what it's like to be ethical in that organization. The problem is you're not going to get people to work, to do their best, to reach their potentials, for the organization to reach their potentials, if people feel that they're working in an unethical environment, if the leader is unethical. That's going to threaten the safety and well-being of the employees. It's going to degrade morale. It's going to compromise mission effectiveness. But you're saying, yeah, well, that's all in the eye of the beholder. I don't know if it's that gray, but
I don't necessarily agree with my comment, right? I'm just being a provocateur to try to see where we can go with this, right? Why then, let's attack this from a different angle, coming in the side door versus the front door. Why did you write the book? What was the burning platform in your belly that said, dang, I got to write a book on leadership ethics? Because you must have felt that was needed. Why is your book needed?
Yeah, and it wasn't strictly ethics. So what I saw looking at the first couple of years of President Trump's first term, especially after having served in the Air Force for 24 years, and we'll call it 28 years if you count 4 years of leadership training and college and ROTC, what I saw was a real aberration in both style and substance in the leadership I was seeing across so many personality traits, leadership traits, and competencies. So what I homed in on in what hangs in the balance is the importance of principled, ethical, competent, and selfless leadership. So there are really 4 areas that I covered there. So competence is important as well. I mean, I was looking at patriotism in the context of what I consider to be the fundamental responsibilities of public leaders. I was looking at competence in the context of organizational leadership and management, and that applies very broadly to the private sector as well. Communication and messaging, the importance of character, as we talked about, and for that I considered humility, empathy, respecting the dignity of others, discipline, self-control, etc. And then the importance of trust and accountability. And that goes to your question about ethics. If you have unethical leadership, you're probably not going to have a lot of trust, nor are you going to have a lot of accountability within the organization, because unethical leaders tend to allow their subordinates to be unethical as well. I've seen that firsthand. And then the importance of selflessness in leadership, which is huge. Again, leading through decision making based on duty and principle versus self-interest. So self-interest, I think, is the key to producing organizations or leadership that are unethical.
Understood. And again, this isn't a political, podcast, but I want to ask one more politics-related question, and then we can move on to some other things. But was the book in response to Trump?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think my two biggest motivations were, one, I wanted people to understand what principled, ethical, competent, and selfless leadership looks like. I've had the privilege of working with terrific senior military leaders, generals, ambassadors in the State Department when I worked at an embassy for 4 years. But at the same time, so it's kind of a book with lots of examples of what not to do, courtesy of Trump and others. But at the same time, a lot of the folks who worked for him were doing the right things, were leading competently and ethically in a principled manner. And then the other side of the other motivator, I think, for me was, at the same time, I wanted people to understand the extent to which Trump's leadership was deficient. That doesn't mean policy-wise everything he did was bad, but what I saw from a leadership perspective was shocking, I guess.
So what is this, a telltale story of things that most people don't know that you were able to I haven't read your book yet, sorry, so I can't speak to, but you have it as your examples by essentially when you speak about President Trump.
Something that somebody wouldn't know?
No, is that what, I guess I'm asking, is the book sort of providing examples in your mind of what unethical leadership looks like in ways that most of us or some of us may not know? Aside from, we get headlines, we see it all the time, but
not necessarily. One of the topics that I think is probably more unique to my book is this idea. I devoted a whole chapter to the idea of principled loyalty, because I think that's a big problem.
What does that mean? Yeah.
So if you look at the loyalty dynamic that exists in organizations or even in the lives of individuals, we too often see this notion of loyalty that's not based on principle or some code of conduct. Rather, it's based on ideas like loyalty for loyalty's sake, which I think is nonsense, or loyalty that's based on some undeserved or misguided notion of reciprocity. A family member did this for me, therefore I need to protect them from the illegal actions they've taken, that kind of thing. And so what we see in organizations is employees showing unprincipled loyalty to unethical superiors, superiors expecting unprincipled loyalty from their subordinates, and superiors demonstrating unprincipled loyalty to their subordinates. So I provide a lot of examples with regard to Trump and his subordinates in that chapter on principled loyalty.
Did you just talk about Trump, or did you also bring in others like Biden and other examples throughout history?
Oh yeah. So in the book, I use historical examples. I use examples from my own career, and I bring in a lot of subject matter experts as well, who kind of provide important insight, I think, into some of the different areas that I talk about in the book. I mean, I wasn't necessarily an expert on all these 37 chapters in the book that I wrote about, but I bring in a lot of my own experience, historical examples, and these experts.
So, by the way, I agree with you that ethical leadership is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm looking at the application of how to do it. I'm looking at how do we take what Phil has to say and apply it. Right? By the way, Philippe is actually, not grew up, but you were born in Paris, right? So that's why I'm playing around with your name a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, is like, I remember seeing something a long time ago that gave some pretty clear evidence that just because you might have whatever one might consider to be facts, to the degree that we can define what facts are, presented to a person who has an opposite political standpoint than you, your pointing that out doesn't actually move them towards your point of view. It actually emboldens them even more. And so there's something about this bias that we have. Call it loyalty bias, call it whatever it is. Tribe bias. This is my political bias, right? I'm a conservative. I'm a liberal. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. You have these sort of tribes that we start to align ourselves around. And maybe we've even found that that's been exacerbated even more post-COVID, where we were so separated from one another. And now we have even more separation with the fact that most communications in businesses is not face-to-face. It's over Zoom and WebEx and so forth. And so our ability to connect and find common ground, we have fewer and fewer opportunities in which to do that. This is my opinion. What is your sense about all this? Because I guess what I'm trying to head here is what do we do to get people on the same flipping page when we have all these other competing biases that cause these rifts?
Yeah, so like you said, preaching doesn't always result in conversion. This is something I feel like I need to practice myself with friends that I vehemently disagree with. This idea of maybe listening more and really putting the effort to understand where they're coming from. Doesn't mean I think they're right, but maybe they'll at least teach me something I didn't know or help me to understand why they believe what they do. So two things I would say. One is, obviously we're getting our news from different sources.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't help. It doesn't help when certain things that we should know about probably aren't being reported on certain networks. Sure, you have a bias on all the different major news networks, but what's more problematic is disinformation or a lack of, like I said, reporting facts. Then we're getting to the point where people are talking about, are we in a post-fact world or whatever?
I think we are.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I would agree. I mean, fact is based on whomever happens to be presenting it and how many people they can get to agree with them. Now,
yeah, I mean,
in the reality of it, do I feel like there are certain biological, scientific, whatever facts in the universe? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the problem then becomes not just, news that's more biased in one direction or the other, but disinformation. And when that becomes normalized, I think that's one of the things that's become normalized recently politically is dishonesty and disinformation. And people consume that. They want to believe it. They do. And that's dangerous because so you were asking me earlier if I was talking about Biden or not. No, the book was written during the Trump administration, so no, I didn't really get into the Biden administration with this book. So yeah, there's a quote I like from Timothy Snyder that talks about the professor Timothy Snyder, who talks about the danger of not having facts or people not agreeing that there's a common set of facts. And he says, to abandon facts is to abandon freedom, because if nothing is true, then nobody can criticize power because there's no basis upon which to do so. So without truth, there's no trust. And he also cautions that when people don't believe in truth, they fall back on belief. And I think that's a lot of what we have right now is people falling back on belief, on a cult of personality, an unwillingness to search for the truth, maybe because they like what they're hearing or they just accept what they're hearing. So if we can't do a better job of not normalizing dishonesty and disinformation, that's going to contribute to the problem of not having a common set of facts that allows us to really debate the issues, to debate ideas.
I agree. I know you're bringing up some really good points. When we have these clashes between other people, call it political, call it biases, however you want to term it. I guess what I'm wanting to get your thoughts on is, if I see you as a foe, let's go back to, the part of the brain that is very much about self-preservation. And the first thing I look at when I see a new person is, are they somebody that's going to hurt me, or are they somebody that's going to help me? Can I trust them, or am I going to distrust them? Right? Are they going to eat me, or am I going to eat them? If we go way back in time, right? Are we going to be on the same, or are we going to partner together? Right?
It sounds like it's rough over there in Bend.
Not at all. No, we're having a great time. But I think I guess I'm putting that out there. That's a universal subconscious filter that we have when we start to interact with people. is we have to answer that one question. Are they a friend or are they a foe? And if you come presenting to me in whatever interpretation that I may have about you, could be your skin color, could be your color of your eyes, could be what you're saying, could be the size of your body relative to mine. And if I interpret that you are a foe, then therefore we have a harder time getting on the same page and agreeing on what facts are, what ethics are, what leadership competencies are. So I guess my thought is, if we go way back into the process by which we get people on the same page regarding ethics, regarding leadership, which needs to happen in order for us to live that way, therefore we need to approach the topic in a way that is non-confrontational, that we make it easy for people to engage with each other, that you connect with me, I connect with you, because we see something in each other that we appreciate, right? The first thing we did before we even started this conversation was we found common things. Oh, you grew up in Paris. Well, I've been to Paris too. Oh yeah, you've been there. I'm going to go there too this summer. And so we found common ground, and all of a sudden Phil is my buddy. You're not a threat, right? What do you think about that approach in terms of how we build alignment around ethical behaviors? Is the way we have those conversations.
How we build ethical behaviors.
Or agree on them. Let's say agree on them. Because again, you might have one definition, I might have a slightly different definition. Or even if we have the same definition, I'm not going to agree with your definition just because I see you as somebody who is a threat.
Yeah, I guess when I see people who I tend to judge because of their political views or their support for certain leaders, I tend to think it's not necessarily that they're unethical. It's maybe about where they're getting their information. Yeah, there've been these, not experiments, but these focus groups where they'll get people from different political parties together. And when they put them in the same room and actually present facts to them about different policy, government policies, for example, they're amazed at how much agreement there actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So, part of that, I guess, is bringing people together for that ethical training.
Right. Yeah. So so bringing people together is something that I want to sort of underline there a little bit. I was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, and we had a big board meeting, and the board has not gotten together physically in a long time, months. It's all been over WebEx and Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And we broke bread together. We had dinner the day before. We had the dinner the day of. We were able to just hang out and learn about each other, where they grew up, their kids, just having that social time. It was talked about later that social time with these people was as important or even more important than the board meeting itself. So there's something to be said for what you just said around getting people together to be able to create that alliance and create that we're on the same page here, we're on the same tribe. We found some commonalities here. You've been to Paris, I've been to Paris. Okay, we already got something on the same page, right? And that then greases the wheels to start talking about things that could be a little bit more difficult. What do you mean by a fact? Where do you get your information? Who do you want to vote for? Like now all of a sudden we've got this, as Stephen Covey would say, we've got some emotional bank account that's beginning to get filled. And even though I don't agree with you, Phil, on certain things, I like you, buddy. So therefore, let's get into it. Let's talk about it. What's your thoughts about all this?
Yeah, we have to resist the emotional payoff of making somebody else wrong is one thing that occurred to me when you were mentioning that. I mean, that's one reason we judge and we make people wrong for their beliefs or even things they do. Is that payoff? If you're wrong, it means I'm right, and that feels good.
Right. We can now have a common enemy with somebody else who also thinks you're wrong. And now my whole neighborhood thinks you're wrong. So now I got a team of people that I agree with who agree with that we think you're wrong, right? So then extrapolate that, grow that, expound that to communities and states and nations, all of a sudden we've got the division that we have right now.
Yeah, and the problem with pushing that division from a leadership or a national perspective is twofold. One, it creates just more. It doesn't have to be political, but for this example, political extremism, and that just results in more gridlock, less happening in Congress, for example. But on a personal level, as you've probably seen, what we get is people starting to respect other people less when they have different political opinions, different agendas politically, and it starts to create this ideological segregation that that prevents simple, normal discourse from occurring between people. I've seen it in my own relationships with my own friends, people I've known for 30, 40 years. I'm working on that, trying to figure out how that can work better. I don't think we differ on ethical considerations,
right?
But I think, yeah.
So you don't differ on ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Then what do you differ on if it's not ethics?
I think we differ on the facts.
The facts?
Yeah.
Or the approach? Because there's something. This is weird. I'm kind of jumping here. Sorry, Phil.
Yeah.
This is something that's so interesting. I feel like and I'm not agreeing with it. So don't get me wrong here. The word facts is now a charged word, and it begins to feel condescending to some when you say, I'm supporting the facts. And then somebody else goes, well, then what the hell do you think I'm supporting? You think I'm an idiot? So then you get into this language that then continues to separate us. I remember my dad and I got into a conversation when I was many, many years ago, back when he was alive, and he's since passed on. And we had different political standpoints at certain things, right? We had the same ethics, I believe. We had different viewpoints on certain aspects of it. And he goes, I don't know what it was, the topic was. He goes, well, anybody with half a brain would understand these are the facts, And I went, oh, man, did you have to say it that way? Because now it got personal, Dad, come on. So anyway, go back to what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I think the approach you were talking about before, what kept coming to mind to me was diplomacy.
Yes,
where
that's a good way of putting it. Yes.
You're trying to get things done together. You're looking after your own interests first. If we're talking about statecraft kind of diplomacy. But you also need to understand exactly where the other person is coming from and what their interests are in order to be effective diplomatically. So there's a difference between saying, as somebody told me, with Trump's first term, Trump saved America. Okay, yeah, I don't see that, but that's that you're entitled to your opinion. I think if you knew certain things, you might not necessarily agree with that. But then when you say, for example, as a matter of fact, that Trump, for example, won the 2020 election, then that's more problematic. And I don't think we can get to this place where, things that are pretty well demonstrated as fact can be allowed to become opinion. And, you get what you got on January 6th when you go down that road.
Well, I'm not going to go down that road with you right now.
No, yeah, no problem.
I don't want to go into a political conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think we'll get splintered into a different discussion. I want to stay high level. That kind of is transferable into a business setting as well. Because that's a lot to unpack when you start talking about January 6th. Then we needed 2 more podcast interviews to really dig into that. I don't dispute that there is, at some point, you got to draw the line, where there's if there was enough investigation into something and you could uncover, to the degree that one could, what you might call a series of facts, you're going to say, this is true. I'm going to have to stand by this, right? And I don't believe that you are correct in your assertion. I also think that in some ways, this is what's tough. And I don't know. I'm sharing maybe one of my my human foibles, but I really like debating people with different, not debating, but I like to get involved, engaged in conversations. And if we have opinions of the same, fine. If we don't, that's fine too, and it's more to me about the connections. Like I love to ski, right? And so I've got a buddy of mine. He goes, "Well, you're a much better skier than me." And I go, "I don't care. I'm just here to be a part of you and me being together, right?"
Yeah.
The skiing is just the excuse to be together. So conversing around, say, politics is really, yes, it's an important topic, but it's more that we're doing it together. That's what I find uplifting, that we can come together and have differences of opinion. I do, however, have said, you know what, that conversation and those other conversations that I've tried to have with these other people just didn't work out. And life's too short. And I'm about quality relationships and quality work and quality experiences. Ergo, maybe this is not a relationship that can proceed because it takes two to tango, So I hear your point that there is a point when you kind of go, there is an ultimate truth here somewhere. There is a point we have to draw the line.
Yeah, and what you said just reminded me of something else. I think we find it much more difficult in this country to talk about politics or topics that are more divisive generally, as opposed to in Europe, for example, where talking about politics is very normal. It's something people do all the time over meals.
So why
with
is
friends.
that, Phil? Why is that? Why is it at Italy, France, Belgium, Luxembourg? Why do those people seem to have an easier time on a same topic that we can't seem to sit down and have those kinds of debates? What's different?
That's a good question. And I think, yeah, well, for one, I think people in other areas are more interested in their politics.
Phil, you still there?
And yep.
Sorry, you just froze up. So, Turnkey Podcast people, make note. We had a little bit of a glitch in the matrix here. So the question that I think that I didn't hear the answer to, I don't know whether or not it got recorded, was why do we have these? Why can't we have the same sort of level of debate over in the United States as they do over in Europe?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that I think people there are frankly more interested in their politics. And that, I don't know if that's because they see it more in their daily lives, but here we tend to pay attention to other things much more, whether it's entertainment generally or sports. It seems to have a much more prominent place in our national conversations for whatever reason. Maybe not so anymore, but But anyway, I know we're getting farther into politics than you would like.
No. But here's one other thing that I think goes back to, again, this idea around alignment around ethics. Like if that's our throughput here on this conversation. So one thought that I have around the difference between the United States and possibly Europe when it comes to the topic of having conversations around politics or other things that might be considered controversial is that is a country that walks and interacts with people at markets and in restaurants much more so than in our country. We are a country of car drivers. You go to Italy, you go to Provence, the place that you and I were talking about beforehand. People are up and moving around and interacting with people in serendipitous ways. Oh, I bumped into you while I was getting my baguette. How's it going? Oh, did you hear about so-and-so? And all of a sudden we're having a quasi-political conversation because we already have created and established a bond prior to that discussion. That's one other thing I think that contributes to their ability to have those conversations, because they're just much more able to connect physically with each other.
Yeah, and that's why it's important here, for example, that we not just sit at home and hold on tightly to our own views. You have to be out there involved in civil society, whether it's volunteering or engaged in some other way with groups of people's views than you do.
Absolutely. And what is it like? How many percentage, Phil, in the world, in the United States that actually has a passport? It's like 40%, 30%. It's like it's not even 50% of our populace that could be traveling doesn't even have a passport. So it speaks to our myopic view of the world and other people when we don't have the opportunity to see other people.
Yeah, I think Mark Twain quipped about that, something about ignorance having to do with not traveling or something like that. But
exactly. Which is one reason why I love to travel is I remember when I was doing some work with Marriott, and I had like 10 years of traveling around the world, and I would sit down with a group of would-be general managers for these hotels, and we'd have dinner together, going back to the connection, right? We had dinner together, and I said, okay, you guys, I want to ask a question for us to all answer individually, go around. What are you most proud of, and what are you most embarrassed about when it comes to your country? And boy, did we get some great conversations going. And we found that there were very similar answers, whether you were in Northern China or whether you were from Peoria, Arizona. We all valued family. We all valued connection. We all valued, rule of law. We all valued a lot of things together, even though we came from different political and economic systems. It was like we found the common thread. Anyway, so Phil, I know we're running out of time a little bit here. My gosh, we could keep going on here. Talk to us a little bit about the book, and then also number 2, how can people follow your work? Because I think it's timely, and I believe that you're onto something that we need to continue to be thinking about.
yeah, so I spoke a little bit about the themes in the book. Again, it's sure, it's written in the context of President Trump's first term, but really I use him to draw examples that are pretty well cited, and or his tweets. Initial research for the book was reading all 25,000 plus of his tweets and retweets in his first term, and those are what informed the topics, frankly. But then, of course, I had to do a lot of research to fill in the gaps. So, again, I think the book provides examples of what not to do, but then it stresses why these leadership competencies and traits are so important. And that's, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. It's probably aimed, for people who are just starting a career. It's, maybe a primer. For those later in a career, it might be a reminder. And for those we've discussed that have more serious ethical issues, rather, then it's a very badly needed reminder. So again, what I want people to get out of this is what principled, ethical, competent, selfless leadership really looks like, and how important it is in ensuring the success of your organizations.
Great. And so I didn't ask you this earlier, Phil, but what do you do outside of doing podcasts? What's the other gig? Are you working? Are you retired? Are you working with clients? What do you do outside of having this book and having conversations like with me?
No, I retired 9 years ago from the Air Force. I started doing a little real estate investment, doing my own thing because I decided to move back to Florida to be closer to family, especially elderly parents. And so I did a little real estate investing just to supplement my income, bought some rentals. And then at some point in late 2018, got the idea to do this. Woke up New Year's Day 2019 and spent the next 6 years essentially writing the book and getting it published, which just happened this past January, or this January. So since then, no, I've really been focused on just doing podcasts, as you said, but more generally promoting the book and getting the word out there. And what I'll probably be doing next is going out and giving talks in public. To Good. Groups to get the word out about how important I think this is, not just for individuals, but for companies, government organizations, and frankly, especially for public servants, for our democracy.
Yes. Good. Well, thank you for wearing the uniform. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate your energy and your thoughtfulness. It's not easy writing a book and getting all this research done. I have great respect for people. I am working on one now, but man, it's tough.
It's
tough. Gee whiz. Well, Phil, it's been great to meet with you, and I will check out that Provence place that you told me about when we head over there in September.
Good deal. Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadovation.